Greetings of the autumnal equinox 2021 era vulgara, or whatever you call this day in your religious or spiritual tradition. Uh, Summer's over. It's I don't know whether to say I'm happy or sad. Uh, but it's been a rough summer. I greet fall with at least a certain amount of hope. Anyway, it's a beautiful day here in Sacramento, the first day of fall, and I hope you're enjoying it too. Uh, I'd like to plug something. I did back in April. Uh, I did a workshop on the Knights Templar, Freemasonry, the Knights Templar, and what I called the most dangerous secret in the world, uh, which is a very dramatic title. But it was very well attended, and uh, it is available. Again, the replay of it is available. So if you missed it the first time, our talk today is going to might pique your interest in seeing that. Uh, I'm reading from my book, The Key to Solomon's Key. Is this the lost symbol of Masonry? The first edition was called Secrets of Magic in Masonry because the second section of the book is a handbook of Solomonic magic, because the front part of the book deals with the character of Solomon, both historic and mythological, and curiously how it may have a direct and indirect connection with traditions of Freemasonry. So I'm going to read a section of that book. It's published by CCC, my good friend, uh, my good friends at CCC, Consortium of Collective Consciousness. It starts off with an epigram. Excuse me, I got the wrong thing here. Hang on. Talk amongst yourselves. Talk amongst yourselves. Here we go. The Templar Secret. Now I've got an epigram here from Albert Mackey, Albert G. Mackey, brother Albert Mackey, 33rd degree. If you're a Mason and have a sort of a stock Masonic library, you've probably got Mackey's Encyclopedia of Freemasonry. Mackey's not a wild, crazy occultist or magician or anything, overtly anyway. He's pretty white bread mainstream Masonry. And here's what he said about the life of King Solomon. In writing the life of King Solomon from a Masonic point of view, it is impossible to omit a reference to the legends which have been preserved in the Masonic system. But the writer, who, with this preliminary notice, embodies them in his sketch of the career of the wise king of Israel, is by no means to be held responsible for a belief in their authenticity. Now, that's a 19th century polite point of view, or a roundabout way of saying, hey, the myth is not history. Okay, guys, the myth is not history. The myth's a myth. It's a good myth. It's got its purpose. Myths are truer than history, but myths aren't history. And now we go back to DuQuette. And now we return to the subject of King Solomon. Although it may not at first be obvious to the reader, the person of the wise king is a vital element of Masonry's legendary connection to the Knights Templar and the secret treasure they allegedly possessed. We learned a little about what the Bible and other religious literature and 1001 Arabian Nights tells us about King Solomon, the king and magician. Now let's examine what we actually know about the historical King Solomon. For the greater part of the last 2 millennia, Western civilization has relied upon the Bible as its primary source of information. From its venerable pages unfold the human story from the creation of heaven and earth to the political intrigues of the Roman Empire. It was the first book printed in the 1450s by the new process of movable type, and for the next few centuries, the vast majority of Europeans who learned to read and write did so for no other purpose than to study the Bible. It was more than a book, it was the book. It occurred to very few of our literate and newly literate ancestors to question the authenticity of the Bible, or, God forbid, to challenge its authority. It was a universally accepted fact that everything written in the Bible was literally true, the unerring Word of God. Conversely, anything not found in the Bible was considered equally untrue. Nowhere, for instance, do we learn in the Bible that the earth revolves around the sun, or that other planets are worlds and have moons that revolve around them. The Bible successfully established itself as its own unquestioned internal authority. The Word of God, because the book tells us it's the Word of God. A book that is true because the book tells us it's true. A book that must be believed because the book tells us it must be believed. For the better part of what we consider the modern era, the Bible said it, we believed it, and that settled it. That may be a perfectly admirable position for a religious devotee to take toward a spiritual document. It is not, however, a realistic attitude for a serious student of history. Now, other than what is written in the Bible, what exactly do we know about the political and military conquests and glories of King David and the fabulous reign of King Solomon? What records have been discovered and preserved of an empire that stretched from the Euphrates to Egypt? What ruins and archaeological digs can we visit to see remnants of King Solomon's magnificent temple, or the luxurious palaces he built for his wife, structures which were many times larger than his temple? What great museums exhibit the helmets, the armor, the swords, the chariots of the massive army that conquered the Philistines, the Assyrians, and the Egyptians? Where can we examine the artistry of the sacred vessels of the temple? What archaeologist has uncovered the tomb of David or Solomon, or a tablet, or an inscription bearing either of their names, or the names of any of their kin or colleagues outlined so explicitly in the Bible? I'm going to digress for a second because we can point to relatively recent uh, discoveries of tablets that make a mention of what is written down as the house of David. Now, several of these in the last few years have proved to be absolute forgeries. And the other one that seems legitimate as far as its provenance is concerned, referencing the house of David. Even the word house is used in the doesn't mean the hereditary house, as if in the House of Windsor or that, but as a house, as a building. Okay. Now, be that as it may, even if they were referring to at least what we might think of as the biblical story, David, it still has no corroborating evidence of an entire era of great wealth and kingship and centralized government. Not a scrap of evidence concerning something like that. So, because I wrote this many years ago, and I guess back in 2010. So, well, anyway. Besides, I'm not trying to prove that, as we will get to in just a moment. What archaeologists have uncovered the tomb of David or Solomon, or a tablet or inscription bearing either of their names or the names of any of their kins or colleagues outlined so explicitly in the Bible. As difficult as it may be for many people to believe, there is no archaeological evidence whatsoever to offer the even slightest suggestion that David or Solomon or Israel's golden kingdoms ever existed. No mention of David or Solomon has ever been found in the mountains of surviving records by the Egyptians or the Assyrians or those of any of their neighboring nations who were allegedly defeated in battle and for years supposedly paid massive tribute to Solomon. No artifacts, large or small, from a mighty Israelite army, no object of art, no inscription, no letter to or from either David or Solomon, no mention of either of them anywhere in the surviving correspondence of neighboring kingdoms. Most conspicuously absent are any records whatsoever of 7 years, or what should be 7 years of taxes and labor levies, for which the Bible suggests should exist for 183,000 workmen conscripted locally and from foreign countries. Documents which most certainly should be found in abundance among existing contemporary records. Considering the fact that the Holy Land is an area of the world where digging has taken place for centuries, and thousands of artifacts have been unearthed, attesting to the existence and chronicling the events of early, even prehistoric cultures in the area, is it not almost inconceivable that such celebrated kingdoms and such powerful world rulers such as David and Solomon could remain so completely invisible to the archaeological records? I realize that for some readers this may sound uncomfortably like heresy. Please don't misunderstand me. and I'm even saying this back in 2010. Don't misunderstand me. I believe it is certainly possible that evidence may someday be found that supports these particular biblical accounts. Okay? But I'm just stating a fact that any objective person willing to do a little honest homework will discover for himself or herself that is, after centuries of excavation, impartial research, there is presently no tangible evidence to suggest that King David, King Solomon, or his magnificent temple in Jerusalem ever existed. That being said, and even though someday that might, good archaeology may someday find it out, but that being said, I want you to consider the possibility that in 12th century Jerusalem, back in the 12th century, the first Knights Templar, intelligent and motivated men who had the exclusive opportunity to excavate the alleged site of King Solomon's temple, also discovered no tangible evidence to suggest that King David or King Solomon or his temple ever existed. Any number of discoveries could have led them to conclude that biblical history was at very best unreliable. Perhaps their excavations demonstrated that a foundation for such an edifice could not possibly have existed at or near that location. Perhaps they found tablets, inscriptions, or other records that proved uncontrovertibly the real history of the region. It could have been 1,000 different items, artifacts, documents, or bits of information. No matter what it exactly was, if it proved, as impartial modern experts are almost universally asserting, that there was no King David, no King Solomon, no King Solomon's temple as described in the Bible. Now, there may have been guys, there may have been tribal, I'm digressing here, there may have been tribal or local or family guys or warlords named Dawood or Solomon. Okay, there may have been guys upon which myths were created around. But the whole scene of a huge conquering kingdom, going 2 generations of ruling the entire area, subjugating Egypt and Syria. And no, no. There was no King David like that, or King Solomon, no King Solomon's temple as described in the Bible. And if there wasn't, the entire literary foundation for the history of the Holy Land prior to the 6th century BC would evaporate into fantasy. Like a literary keystone placed squarely in the middle of the chronology of the Judeo-Christian biblical narrative, the story of David and Solomon links and supports the narratives of both the Old and the New Testaments. Because in the New Testament, look how they went to great lengths to write Jesus's genealogy in those 2 Gospels, proving that he came down from David through Solomon. That was his credentials. That was his Davidic throne. that he was king of the Jews with. That was his ticket. If this keystone is removed, not only does the historic integrity of most of the Old Testament collapse, but a major facet of the credentials of New Testament Jesus is also radically altered. After all, as Lon just said, I get ahead of myself in my own digressions. After all, in order to prove Jesus' birth was the fulfillment of Old Testament prophecies that he was the Messiah, the heir to the Davidic throne of Israel, the Gospels go to great lengths to demonstrate that Jesus was a direct descendant of David and Solomon. Removing this keystone would also be unsettling for pious Muslims, who, despite their differences, considered themselves to be, along with Jews and Christians, people of the book. What would happen to Islamic traditions that also presume to reach that far back into biblical history? In the 12th century, such faith-crushing revelations would have threatened to vaporize the authority of the church and reduce to ashes the concept of the divine right of kings that had been the foundation of the social order in Europe and the West for 1,000 years. It would have turned the world upside down. It would have been the most dangerous secret in the world. And I go on. Okay, of course I go on. Okay, but that's what we're going to do today. That's all we're going to do today. I want you to do whatever you do to celebrate this day, whether it's to go in the kitchen and see if you can stand an egg on the end. Because about where I am, the days are now pretty much equal. But it's still pretty hot in Sacramento. So, but right now it's a nice cool morning. Anyway, if you haven't seen the Knights Templar, Freemasonry, Knights Templar, and the greatest, what did I say, the most dangerous secret in the world, please, I've got the link put up on my page this morning. So try to see that if this has whetted your appetite for Solomonic myth busting. But until tomorrow, continue to be good to yourself and be good to each other. Do what thou wilt shall be the whole of the law. Love is the law, love under will.